Okay, so here's a finished donut that we're going to be making. It's just a basic round donut with a hole in it, and in the back here, it's been hollowed out, and that's because you remember if you put clay in the kiln that's any thicker than your thumb, it risks not having all the moisture out of the inside, and it could explode in the kiln. So we're going to be all making our first donut that we make is all going to be this same size. It's going to be roughly 3 inches in diameter, like 3 to 3.5 inches in diameter. And then the hole we want to be anywhere from a half an inch diameter to 1 inch diameter. So this donut, when I measured it, when it was wet, it was about just over 3 inches in diameter. And the hole was almost an inch, not quite, like more like 3/4 of an inch across. Okay. And we'll go over that in the rubric also. So to start with, you're going to use a really large piece of clay. I've found that when I was experimenting with making the donut shape, that it's best to start with too much clay. So we're only going to end up using about half of it. If you look at this compared to this, like it's definitely not this much clay. But if you start with this much clay, you end up with a more successful donut. And then the other half will just go back into the clay bag so that the next period can use that clay. This piece has already been wedged, so if you are getting clay that is not fresh out of the bag, make sure you wedge your clay first. And what you're going to do to start is just kind of roll it out. You can squeeze it first if you want to make it into more of a log shape, and then start rolling it. So basically what you're making is really just a big fat coil, much, much thicker than any of the coils that you made for your coil pot. So I'm just going to roll it out. Any little wrinkles that you get in it, you can just smooth out along the way. If you have little wrinkles, just smooth them out. So at this point, we want to keep rolling it out until it gets to about the thickness of this, but maybe a little bit thicker. So right now you can see this is much thicker than this. So I'm just going to keep rolling it out until it's about the thickness of the donut that I have that's already made. And this donut hasn't been bisque fired yet. It's still just greenware. If you are noticing that while you're rolling it out that it's starting to flatten, like get more narrow on one side than the other, just kind of stop for a second and flatten it on the side that's too long, and then keep rolling. I'm flattening it a little bit because it was starting to get too narrow on one side. Okay, it's starting to get to a good thickness. So this is about the size of the big fat coil that you want to end up with. And then it's super quick and easy to make the donut. This is longer than it needs to be, but what you're going to do is you're going to take it and you're going to bend it like this. And you can do this pretty quickly. You don't have to do it slowly. You're going to go like this and cross it over like you're making a pretzel. Okay, like that. And the reason why you want to do that is, and I experimented with this, the reason why you want to do that is because you end up with a better donut if you cross it over and do this first instead of crossing it over. Instead of doing this and cutting it where you think it needs to go, it's better if you do this all the way And then you end up with these nice wrinkles here that naturally occur because donuts have these wrinkles in them and you want those wrinkles. So if you use this technique, you end up already having those nice donut wrinkles that you want to end up with to begin with. All right. So go like that. Then once it's already crossed, you can look at this and you can decide where you need to cut. So if you just cut, and I forgot to bring a fettling knife with me, but that's okay, I can use my needle tool. If you look at about where you want to cut, you can kind of give yourself a little guideline of where you should cut. And I think that's pretty good. So I'm going to cut down right here. Okay, take this piece off. And then exactly in the same spot right here, cut down right here. And then take this piece off. And then I have the spot where I can attach. And remember, we want to score it and slip it before we attach it. And hopefully you guys learned in the coil pot unit that if you don't score and slip, it ends up pieces falling apart. And we don't want our donut falling apart. So I'm just going to score here. And score in the other direction here. Okay, you guys can use the cups of slip that we have. I'm just adding some water from my sponge here. Okay, and then attach the two pieces like this. And then make sure it gets really nicely smooth because you don't want it to look like there's a seam there at all. And I have some tools here that I brought with me to be able to get the nice wrinkle back in the donut here that would have been there had I not cut it and attached it. And I'm turning it over and I'm doing the same thing to the other side, making sure it's really well attached so this donut doesn't come apart when it dries or gets fired. Okay. The nice thing about using this method with using the coil is that you end up with a donut that is very round on both sides. If you were to use another method, you might end up with a donut that's round on the top, but very flat on the bottom. And donuts don't look like that. They're round on both sides. Okay, so you can see inside the donut here, you've got those nice wrinkles that actual donuts have. And in the spot where I attached the donut, it kind of got lost a little bit. So you can go back in with a wooden tool like this and just kind of create those wrinkles. And you can even exaggerate the wrinkles that were already there to get a more realistic look to your donut. So I'm just kind of going in and doing this. And when we watched that introduction video about Yong Kim, back when we started the donut drawing, I did see there is no video that shows his exact technique of how he makes his donuts. I scoured the internet. I could not find a video that shows exactly how he makes his donuts from beginning to end. And I get it. He probably wants to keep his secret safe so that nobody can copy his exact technique. But in the video, I did see him using a tool just like this one and going back into his clay donuts and creating these wrinkles. So this technique that I'm doing right now, I actually did see Yong Kim doing to his donuts. Okay. All right, so the next thing we have to do is to hollow out the bottom. And to hollow out the bottom, you need to use a ribbon tool. This is called a ribbon tool. It is square on one side, or it looks like a triangle, but it gives you it cuts out a square. And there's a curved loop on the other side. So decide which side of your donut you want to be the back. If there's one side that looks nicer to you than the other, then I like this side better, so I'm going to make this side the back. And here's what you do. You take your ribbon tool and you stick it right into the middle. And all you have to do is just lead it around the donut like this. carefully staying in the center of the back of the donut. You don't want to go too far towards the hole or too far towards the end, because you want it to look from the outside like a whole donut. So you don't want to slip and go too far this way, because then you'll see that hollowed out space from the side. You don't want to go too far this way in this direction, because then you'll see it from the middle. So if you just pull on this, it'll come right out. Okay, and then just to be on the safe side so that there's not too much thickness of the clay, I'm just going to go back in and dig out just a little bit more. Okay, and then you have to work a little bit to get out the rest of the clay that's in there that you just cut out. And then the last step is to neaten it up, because even though it's the back, you still want it to look neat and not be too bumpy on the bottom. So I'm going to just smooth out this edge. And smooth out this edge. It kind of came up a little bit, and I want it to be able to sit nicely, whether it's hanging on a wall or sitting flat on a table. I want this to not, if this was sticking up like that, it wouldn't sit flat or hang flat on a wall. So you want to make sure you kind of flatten it back down after it's been lifted by the needle or the loop tool. And then you can use another tool to just kind of clean up those edges. And just keep cleaning it up until it looks good to you. Okay, and then at this point, I could do some more cleaning up. It's not quite clean enough yet, but at this point, after you've gotten it nice and cleaned up, you want to take your needle tool and scratch your initials into the back here, in a spot where it's not going to show if it's sitting on a table or hanging up on a wall. So what I did with mine is I put it right here. I'm putting Miss D. You guys can scratch your initial and then put your period, the number for your period. This is the 4th donut that I've made, so I'm going to put number 4. Like I said, I was experimenting with different ways of making it, and so this one was my 3rd attempt, so there's a number 3 on the back. This is my 4th attempt, so I'm putting a number 4. You guys are going to put the number for your period. Okay, make sure it's scratched in nicely so that you can actually see it. And then just keep working after this to neaten up the back, and then flip it back over and finish doing the top. You can use your sponge, a damp sponge, to smooth it out. You can continue using your wooden tool to get the wrinkles inside the donut exactly how you want them. You can have some wrinkles be bigger and then some littler ones. And again, just don't use too wet of a sponge. You don't want your sponge to be soaking wet. You want the sponge to be just damp so that it smooths. You don't want it to be dripping wet so that you're going to end up with a soggy donut that will droop. If you get your clay too wet, it's not going to hold up. It's not going to be strong. So make sure it's just a damp sponge, just to be used for smoothing. Okay. And then just make sure that the back of mine is not quite neatened up enough yet, but for the purposes of making a shorter video, I'm not going to quite finish cleaning that up yet. All right, so there's a finished donut. This will be a recording that you can watch again while you're making your donut, so that you can kind of follow along with the steps that I'm doing. Any questions? No questions? Yes.
Are we just making one donut?
We're going to make one donut to start, this is going to be our first donut that we make. That's all the same technique, same shape. And you're going to glaze it however you'd like to glaze it. So it'll look different once it's glazed, but it'll look the same before it's glazed. And then the second donut that we make after this project, we're going to be able to change the shape of it. You can make a donut that is round with no hole. You can make a heart-shaped donut. You can make the Mickey Mouse donut, the devil-shaped donut, or any other shape that Young Kim doesn't use that you would like to make. And then there's going to be another option where you can, if you want to, for the second donut, you can cut it in half and turn it into a box that actually closes. And so we'll show those techniques when we get to the second donut. But for this first project, for this first ceramic donut, you're just making a round donut with a hole just like this one. Any other questions?